It was a beautiful afternoon in late spring, with the sun shining brightly and a light breeze gently rustling the leaves of the trees along the country roads. Emma Carter, a successful businesswoman from the city, decided to take a break from her hectic life and drive out to the countryside for some peace and quiet. She had been working long hours and felt the need to clear her mind, so she packed a small bag and headed out to a charming bed and breakfast she had found online. The drive was long, but the picturesque beauty of the rural landscape made it worth it. The roads were narrow and winding, lined with tall trees and open fields. Emma loved the peaceful silence far away from the noisy, bustling city. She was enjoying the serenity, humming softly along to the music playing on the car's stereo, when something unexpected happened. As she approached a sharp bend on the Cow Road, the steering wheel suddenly jerked in her hands and she instinctively tried to regain control of the vehicle. But before she could, the SUV she was driving started sliding uncontrollably toward the edge of the road. Her heart raced as she desperately tried to steer the car back onto the path, but it was too late. The vehicle was already skidding off the road and toward the steep slope below. Emma's breath caught in her throat. The SUV was no longer responding to her desperate attempts to steer. Panic set in as the car careened towards the edge of the cliff. Her pulse quickened, and her thoughts scattered in every direction, her mind desperately searching for a solution. She was so far from help, and the road was too narrow for anyone to be nearby. The sound of the tires squealing against the dirt filled her ears, and she could feel the car losing control, drifting closer and closer to the edge. In that split second as the SUV tilted toward the abyss, Emma's life flashed before her eyes. She had been successful in so many ways, had built an empire from the ground up, but now all of that seemed so unimportant. She had no control over this moment, and she realized that her wealth, her status, none of it mattered. Her thoughts were interrupted by a loud thud, and before she could react, she felt a sudden jolt. Through the panic, Emma's mind tried to piece together what was happening. Her door was suddenly pulled open, and before she could understand what was going on, a strong, firm hand reached inside and grabbed her by the arm. The next thing she knew, she was being dragged out of the car by a stranger. Emma's heart was still racing, her body trembling in shock. The person who had pulled her out of harm's way was a man, rough around the edges, his clothes covered in dirt from the field, his face weathered by the sun. He had come out of nowhere, as though he had appeared just in time to save her. She was still in a daze, but she instinctively knew that this man had just saved her life. The man, who was breathing heavily from the effort, didn't waste any time checking if Emma was okay. He pulled her away from the wrecked SUV, moving her further from the edge of the cliff where the vehicle had nearly gone over. He kept his hand on her shoulder, guiding her away from the dangerous spot. Emma stumbled, her legs shaky, but the man was strong and steady, and he kept her balanced. It took a moment for Emma to gather her senses. Her heart was still pounding in her chest, and she could hear her own ragged breaths in the air. She turned to look back at the car, which was now teetering dangerously on the edge of the slope. The man was scanning the area, his eyes constantly moving, making sure they were both safe. Emma could barely comprehend the situation. One moment, she had been in control of her life, and in the next, she had been saved by this stranger. She finally spoke, her voice trembling slightly. Thank you. You saved me," she stammered, still in shock. She looked up at the man, whose face was unreadable, but there was a kindness in his eyes that calmed her racing heart. "Don't mention it," the man replied, his voice calm and steady, though he was still breathing heavily from his sudden exertion. "You're all right now. That's all that matters." Emma looked at him more closely. He was tall, probably in his late 30s, with broad shoulders and calloused hands that had clearly done hard work for many years. His clothes were simple, a faded shirt and jeans with mud stains from the field. Despite his rough appearance, there was something undeniably kind about the way he looked at her, something genuine and unpretentious. Emma suddenly realized that this man had come out of nowhere, without thinking of his own safety, just to help her. Her mind tried to process everything, but the shock made it hard to focus. She wasn't even sure how long she had been sitting on the ground, with the man standing protectively over her. The sound of the wind blowing softly through the trees and the distant chirping of birds was the only thing that broke the silence. It felt surreal to her, as if she were living in a dream. But one thing was certain. She had been pulled from the brink of disaster by a stranger who didn't expect anything in return. When Emma finally found her voice again, she asked, "What's your name? I can't thank you enough for what you did." The man looked at her for a moment, almost as if he were deciding whether to tell her. After a brief pause, he spoke. "Jack Collins," he said, his voice quiet. "I live nearby. Just a farmer. Nothing special." "Jack," Emma repeated, nodding as she tried to take in all of the details. "Thank you again, Jack. I don't know what I would have done without you." Jack smiled softly, though it was more of a polite gesture than a beaming grin. "You're safe now. That's what matters." Emma's heart still felt heavy, and she realized that her hands were trembling slightly. The adrenaline was still coursing through her veins, making her feel disoriented. She had never experienced anything like this before. Her life had always been about control, precision, and success. But now, all of that seemed so far away. Here she was, in the middle of nowhere, saved by a man who had no reason to help her, other than sheer kindness. The contrast between her world and his was stark, and for the first time Emma felt a sense of vulnerability that she had never experienced in her life. As Jack stood there, looking at her with quiet concern, Emma felt a strange sense of comfort. She wasn't sure what it was about him. Perhaps it was the calm way he carried himself, or maybe it was the way he hadn't hesitated for even a second to pull her from the wreckage. There was something in his presence that made her feel safe, something she couldn't explain. Jack, noticing her unease, asked if she was all right, but Emma simply nodded, still trying to gather her thoughts. There was no need to say more. She was safe, and that was all that mattered. But as she looked at Jack standing there in his simple clothes, a small part of her wondered who he was, how he had come to be there, and why he had decided to risk everything to save her. Before they could say more, the sound of a distant car engine broke the silence, signaling that help might soon arrive. Emma turned her head, but when she looked back at Jack, he was already taking a step back. He didn't seem interested in any sort of attention, and before she could speak, he turned and began to walk back toward his farm. "Wait," Emma called, a sense of gratitude rising in her chest. "Will I see you again?" Jack stopped but didn't turn around. After a long pause, he simply said, "I'm sure we'll cross paths again, Miss Carter." With that, he continued walking away, leaving Emma standing there, feeling both grateful and strangely curious about the man who had just changed the course of her life. As the sound of the approaching vehicles grew louder, Emma stood still for a moment, watching Jack walk away. Little did she know that this brief encounter, this act of heroism, would set into motion a series of events that would forever alter both of their lives. After that fateful day, Emma couldn't stop thinking about Jack Collins. She had seen him for only a brief moment, but his actions, rushing to save her life without hesitation, putting himself in danger for a stranger, had left a lasting impression on her. His face, weathered and kind, had stayed with her, and for days she found herself replaying the moment over and over in her mind. It was something out of a storybook, something she had never expected to happen to her. Emma had been used to controlling every aspect of her life. She was a successful businesswoman with a career that many admired, and her life in the city had always been full of luxury, success, and status. But in that moment, when she had almost lost everything, her wealth and success hadn't mattered at all. It was Jack's simple bravery and selflessness that had mattered. After returning to the city, Emma tried to return to her usual routine, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the countryside. It wasn't just Jack's actions that haunted her. It was something about him. He was so different from the people she was used to, yet there was something so genuine and pure about him. She found herself wanting to know more. What was his life like? Why had he been on that road at that exact moment? Emma's curiosity grew stronger with each passing day. She decided to take the first step and reach out to him. It wasn't easy for her. She wasn't used to asking for favors or seeking out people like this. but she couldn't ignore the pull she felt toward Jack. It was more than gratitude, it was something deeper, something she couldn't quite explain. So, after a few days of thinking about it, she found herself searching for his contact information. When Emma found the phone number of a local farm in the area, she hesitated for a moment before dialing it. Her hand shook slightly as she held the phone to her ear. The line rang several times before a deep voice answered on the other end. "Hello? Hello, is this Jack Collins?" Emma asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Yes, this is Jack," came the reply, a little puzzled. Jack didn't know who was calling, and Emma could sense the confusion in his voice. She quickly introduced herself, explaining that she was the woman he had saved from the car accident a few days earlier. "Oh, you," Jack said after a moment of silence. "I didn't think I'd hear from you." Emma smiled softly at his response, a little embarrassed but glad he remembered her. "I just wanted to thank you again for what you did. You saved my life, and I feel like I need to show my gratitude somehow. I don't know how to thank you enough." Jack, ever humble, responded quickly. "It was nothing, really. Just glad you're all right." Emma could tell that Jack wasn't one to accept praise or attention easily. He didn't seem to want anything in return for what he had done, and that only made her want to help him even more. She felt this strong urge to make things right, to connect with him, to somehow return the favor. "I know it's a lot to ask, but I'd really like to meet you again. Maybe we could talk just for a little while?" Emma asked, her voice tentative. There was a long pause on the other end of the phone. Jack probably wasn't used to people from her world reaching out to him, especially after such a dramatic incident. She wasn't sure how he would respond, but she could feel her heart racing as she waited for his reply. "Well, I suppose a quick chat wouldn't hurt," Jack said after a moment, his voice warm but still cautious. "I'm usually around the farm in the afternoons if you want to stop by." Emma's heart skipped a beat. "That sounds perfect. I'll come by this weekend." The phone call ended with Jack giving her the directions to his farm, and Emma hung up, feeling a strange mix of excitement and nerves. She wasn't entirely sure what to expect from this meeting, but something told her that it would be different from anything she had experienced before. The weekend came faster than she expected. As Emma drove out to the countryside again, she couldn't help but feel a little nervous. She had never visited a farm before, and she certainly hadn't ever met someone like Jack. The road felt unfamiliar, and as she neared the farm, the world around her seemed quieter, simpler. The tall, open fields and the smell of fresh earth were in stark contrast to the busy streets of the city she was used to. She arrived at the farm and parked her car by the gate. Jack was already waiting for her, standing near a large barn, his hands resting on a shovel as he leaned against a post. His clothing was the same as before, simple, practical, and worn. But there was something in the way he stood that made him seem at ease with the world around him. His life, unlike Emma's, was rooted in hard work and simplicity. Jack waved when he saw her car and smiled. "Hey there, Miss Carter." "Emma," she corrected with a small laugh. "Please call me Emma." He nodded, then gestured toward the open space around them. "You made it. I wasn't sure if you would actually show up." Emma smiled back. "I wasn't sure either," she admitted. "But I'm glad I did." As she stepped out of the car, she took a deep breath, feeling the fresh air fill her lungs. It was a welcome change from the smog and noise of the city. Jack led her toward a small wooden table set up in the shade of a nearby tree. There they sat and began to talk. The conversation started out a bit awkwardly, as Emma wasn't sure how to approach Jack. But the more they talked, the more at ease she felt. They discussed everything from the weather to their lives. Emma learned that Jack had grown up on this farm, working alongside his parents and later taking over when they retired. It wasn't a glamorous life, but it was one he loved. He found peace in the rhythm of farm work, in the quiet moments when everything seemed to slow down. "I don't think I could live in a city," Jack admitted, laughing softly. "It's too loud, too busy. I prefer the calm." Emma chuckled. "I know what you mean. It's hard to find peace in a place like that, but I suppose it's all I've known." They continued talking for hours, the conversation flowing easily. Emma was surprised by how comfortable she felt around him, despite the differences in their lives. She had been so focused on her career and the fast-paced world she lived in that she had forgotten what it felt like to simply talk, to enjoy the company of someone without expectations or pretense. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the fields, Emma realized that she didn't want the conversation to end. She didn't want to leave this place or this man who had somehow made her feel more alive than she had in a long time. The connection between them was undeniable, and as they said their goodbyes, she couldn't help but feel a sense of longing. Jack seemed to notice the shift in the air as well. Before she left, he said, "I'm glad you came, Emma. It's not often I get visitors out here. You're always welcome, anytime." Emma smiled warmly, touched by his sincerity. "Thank you, Jack. I think I'll take you up on that offer." As she drove back to the city that evening, she couldn't stop thinking about her time on the farm. Jack had opened a new world to her, a world she never knew existed, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of calm, of belonging, that she hadn't found in the city. After her visit to Jack's farm, Emma felt something inside her begin to change. She had never known such a peaceful, grounding place where every moment seemed to carry a quiet rhythm of its own. Jack's world was so different from her own, and yet, for reasons she couldn't quite explain, it felt like a world she wanted to be part of. The busy city life she had once found so fulfilling now seemed distant, and Emma found herself drawn back to the farm over and over. The visits became more frequent. Emma would take weekends off from her corporate responsibilities to spend time with Jack. She would arrive in the early afternoons, and they would spend hours talking, walking through the fields, or simply sitting and enjoying the calm. Jack, for his part, was never one for long speeches or deep conversations about life's big questions. But his presence was steady, and there was something comforting about how he simply allowed her to be herself. He didn't try to impress her, didn't need to show off, and that simplicity was something Emma found refreshing. She had spent her entire life being judged for her wealth and success, but with Jack, she didn't need to be anyone other than who she was. Yet as their bond deepened, Emma began to feel a growing sense of unease. She knew that Jack was a man of few words and that he never expected anything from her. But as the days passed, the differences between their worlds became harder to ignore. Jack's life was rooted in the land, in work that never stopped, and in a humble, modest routine that could not have been further from her world of business meetings, luxury cars, and expensive dinners. At first, she thought it didn't matter. After all, love was supposed to be about connection, not about social status. But the reality was far more complicated than that. Emma's friends began to notice the changes in her. She was still the same, successful woman who ran a thriving business, but now, there was something different in the way she carried herself. She seemed more relaxed, more at peace, as if the stress of her corporate life no longer weighed so heavily on her shoulders. But some of her friends weren't happy about it. They noticed that Emma was spending less time with them, and when they did meet, she spoke more about Jack and less about her high-powered job. The more Emma shared about him, the more uncomfortable her friends seemed to get. One afternoon, during a lunch meeting with a few of her close friends, Emma was telling them about her latest weekend visit to Jack's farm. She could tell by their expressions that they weren't as thrilled as she had hoped. "Emma, you've got to be careful." Her friend Sarah, who had always been the voice of reason, said cautiously, "I get that you like this guy, but he's a farmer, Emma. You're running a multi-million-dollar business. You're in two completely different worlds." Emma felt her chest tighten as Sarah's words hit home. She wasn't blind to the difference in their lifestyles, but she had hoped her friends would understand. She had hoped they would be happy. For her, seeing how much Jack made her smile, how much he had brought peace into her life. Instead, it felt as if they were questioning her decisions. "Jack is a good man," Emma said quietly, trying to defend him, but already feeling a bit defensive. "He's kind and he works hard. I think he's one of the most genuine people I've ever met. I don't care that he doesn't have the same lifestyle I do." "I get that you like him, Emma. Sarah said with a sigh. But look at it. Realistically, what happens when you need to go to business meetings or take a trip to Paris for work? You think he's going to fit into that world? The words stung more than Emma expected. She had known that her life in the city was fast-paced and demanding, but hearing her friends point out how Jack wouldn't fit into that world made her question everything. Would she really be able to balance both lives? Would she constantly have to choose between her career and her feelings for Jack? Later that night, Emma tried to push the conversation from her mind. She went home and sat by the window looking out at the twinkling lights of the city below. It was a familiar view, one she had always loved. But tonight, it seemed far less comforting. The noise of the city, the rush of traffic, and the flashing lights all felt distant to her now, as if she were watching the world from the outside looking in. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that the life she had been living for so many years was starting to feel empty. She had everything she thought she wanted: success, wealth, prestige, but it had come at the cost of something she now realized was much more important: peace. The next day, Emma couldn't shake the feelings of doubt that had crept into her mind. She needed to talk to Jack. She needed to hear his thoughts on all of this. So without thinking too much about it, she drove out to his farm again, hoping that being there would bring some clarity. When Jack greeted her at the door, he looked surprised, but pleased to see her. "Hey there, Emma. What brings you back? So soon?" "I need to talk to you," Emma said, her voice a little more serious than usual. Jack raised an eyebrow but nodded, stepping aside to let her in. The barn smelled of fresh hay and the afternoon sunlight filtered through the windows, casting a warm glow over everything. Emma walked in, her mind racing. They sat on the old, wooden bench by the barn, and Emma took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "I've been thinking a lot about us," she started slowly. "About me and you." Jack tilted his head slightly, his expression serious. "Is something wrong?" "I don't know," Emma admitted, feeling the weight of her words. I think I'm starting to see how different our lives are, and I'm not sure if they can fit together." Jack's brow furrowed as he listened. He had never been one to overthink things, but he could sense the unease in her voice. "Emma, I'm not asking you to change your life. You've got your business, your work, and I respect that." "I know," Emma said quickly, but she could see that he didn't fully understand. "But it's not just about that. It's about everything. You live here on the farm and I live in the city. Our worlds don't mix. And the people around me, my friends, they're not going to understand. They think I'm making a mistake." Jack stayed quiet for a moment, absorbing her words. Finally he said, "You don't need anyone's approval, Emma. You don't need to explain yourself to anyone. You have to do what makes you happy, not what others think you should do." His words were simple, but they struck a chord deep inside. Emma. She had always been so focused on what people thought of her, on living up to their expectations. But Jack was right. She had never asked herself what made her happy, what she truly wanted out of life. "But I don't know if I can live in two worlds," Emma confessed, the fear of losing both her career and Jack weighing on her shoulders. "I don't know if it's possible." Jack reached out and placed a hand gently on hers. "I can't promise you anything, Emma. I'm not the right man for the life you've built. But I'm not asking you to give it all up. I just want you to be sure of what you want." His honesty was raw, and Emma felt a wave of gratitude for his openness. She realized that Jack wasn't asking her to choose, but he also wasn't going to pretend that things would be easy. He wasn't trying to pull her away from her world. But he was showing her that it was okay to choose what felt right in her heart. For the first time, Emma felt a sense of peace in the midst of her confusion. She wasn't sure what the future would hold, but she knew that she had to be honest with herself. It was a moment of clarity, a small but powerful realization. Love wasn't about fitting into a mold. It was about finding the space to be yourself, no matter how different the worlds around you seemed. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the farm, Emma knew that the choice she faced wouldn't be easy, but it was one she had to make for herself. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She had to follow her heart. As the weeks went by, Emma found herself caught in an emotional whirlwind. She was torn between two worlds, the high-paced, high-stakes life she had built in the city and the quiet, simple existence she had discovered with Jack on his farm. It wasn't just a matter of deciding where to live or what kind of job she would have. It was about her identity. Who was she really? Was she the driven businesswoman she had worked so hard to become? Or was she someone else entirely? A woman who found peace in the simplicity of a farmer's life. The conflict was eating away at her. Emma had always believed that she had everything under control. She had built her career from the ground up, made important connections, and achieved success beyond her wildest dreams. Yet, as she spent more time with Jack, she realized that something inside her had shifted. She no longer felt the same drive to climb higher in the corporate world. Instead, her heart seemed to be pulling her in a different direction. But how could she let go of everything she had worked for? Jack, on the other hand, had always been straightforward. He had never promised her a life of luxury or grandeur. He didn't have the resources or the status that she was used to. What he did have was a deep love for the land and a simple, peaceful life. Jack had never been interested in fame, wealth, or the fast pace of the world Emma was part of. But when Emma told him about her internal conflict, he saw it clearly for what it was: a struggle of the heart. "I don't want you to feel like you have to choose me, Emma," Jack had said one afternoon as they sat on the porch of his small farmhouse, the evening sun casting long shadows on the ground. "I don't want you to give up your dreams. If you love your work, then go for it. I'll support you no matter what." His words were gentle but firm, and they stung a little. Emma had hoped that Jack would tell her that everything would work out, that they could somehow merge their two worlds. But Jack wasn't interested in forcing her into a decision she wasn't ready to make. He respected her too much for that. "I know you're trying to help, but I feel like I'm losing everything," Emma confessed. "I'm torn, Jack. You know how much I love being here with you, but I also can't forget the life I've built in the city. It feels like I'm living in two different worlds, and I don't know how to make them come together." Jack sighed, his eyes soft but steady. "I don't want to make things harder for you, Emma. I've always been content with the life I have. But I can't ask you to give up everything you've worked for just for me. That's not fair." Emma felt a lump form in her throat. She had never realized how much Jack cared for her and how deeply he understood her struggle. It wasn't just about the farm or his simple life. It was about his respect for her and her choices. He wasn't asking her to give up anything, but in a way, that was what made it harder. The decision was hers to make, and that weight felt heavier with every passing day. Back in the city, things were moving forward at work. Emma's father had been struggling with his health for some time, and she had taken on more responsibilities at the company to fill in for him. The pressure was immense. With each new meeting, each new deal, Emma felt herself pulled deeper into the corporate world. Her company had just secured a new, huge contract with a major international client, and her team was depending on her to lead them through the next few months. There were flights to catch, presentations to make, and endless tasks to complete. The excitement of the deal was supposed to make her feel alive, but instead it left her feeling more exhausted and disconnected than ever before. Emma had always thrived in this high-pressure environment. But now, as she sat in her office late, one evening, staring out over the city skyline, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. She thought about Jack, about his steady presence, his laughter, and the quiet moments they shared. She had started to realize that the work she had once found so fulfilling now felt like a constant cycle of stress. It was as though she was running in circles, never stopping long enough to feel truly satisfied. Her thoughts were interrupted by a call from her mother, who had been keeping a close eye on her during her father's illness. "Emma, I know you're busy, but your father's health has taken a turn for the worse. I think it's time for you to step in and take over more of the management here at the company. I can't handle everything on my own." Her mother's words hit Emma like a wave. She had always known that this day would come, but the reality of it was different. She felt a deep sense of responsibility to her family and her company, but it was starting to feel like an impossible task. How could she continue managing her career at this pace and still find time for the things that really mattered to her, like Jack? That evening, Emma drove to Jack's farm. She didn't call ahead. This time she just needed to see him. The drive was long and her mind was in turmoil, but as she neared the farm, she felt a sense of calm settle over her. When she arrived, Jack was working in the garden, pulling weeds from the rows of vegetables. He looked up when he saw her car and waved, smiling that familiar, warm smile that always made her feel at home. "Hey you," Jack said, walking over to her as she stepped out of the car. "Everything okay?" "I don't know," Emma replied, her voice heavy. "I'm not sure of anything right now." Jack paused, sensing the weight of her words. "Do you want to talk about it?" Emma nodded and followed him to the porch. They sat together in the fading sunlight, and she told him everything. The pressure at work, the responsibilities that were piling up, the feeling of being caught in a whirlwind she couldn't escape. Jack listened quietly, never interrupting, just letting her speak. He didn't try to offer solutions or advice. He just let her talk, which was what she needed more than anything else. When Emma finished, Jack said quietly, "You don't have to do it all, Emma. You don't have to carry all the weight. You've already done so much. Maybe it's time to think about what really makes you happy." Her heart tightened as she looked at him. Jack had always been so clear about what mattered in life: hard work, kindness, and being true to yourself. He wasn't saying she had to leave her job or her life in the city behind, but he was asking her to be honest with herself about what she wanted. "You don't think I'm crazy for even thinking about this?" Emma asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Jack smiled, his eyes kind and understanding. "Not at all. You just need to take a step back and listen to your heart. That's all anyone can do." For the first time in weeks, Emma felt like she could breathe. Jack wasn't asking her to choose him over everything else. He was giving her the space to make her own decision, to choose the life that would truly make her happy. It was a relief, but it was also terrifying. The future felt uncertain, and there was no easy path forward. She knew that whatever decision she made, there would be sacrifices. But Jack had given her the most important thing she could have: permission to be true to herself, without judgment. That night, as Emma lay in bed, she thought about everything Jack had said. She thought about her career, her family, her friends, and most importantly, about her own happiness. What was she willing to sacrifice? What was worth fighting for? Jack had shown her that there was more to life than just work, more than just success. He had reminded her that peace, love, and balance were worth seeking, and for the first time in a long time, Emma felt ready to face the future, whatever it might bring. Emma stood quietly on the balcony of her city apartment, looking out at the busy streets below. The noise of cars, the flashing lights, and the hum of the fast-moving world all surrounded her. But inside, her heart was still. After many long nights of thinking, doubting, and dreaming, she had finally come to a decision. A decision that wasn't about choosing between two lives, but about choosing peace over pressure, love over fear, and meaning over success. She had spent most of her life building something that looked perfect from the outside. Fancy offices, business meetings in tall buildings, awards, and praise from people who barely knew her. But lately, all that had started to feel like a heavy coat she no longer wanted to wear. And when she thought about the moments that made her feel truly alive, none of them were from the boardroom. They were from a small farm surrounded by open fields. They were moments with Jack. Emma decided to sell a part of her company, the section that required the most travel and responsibility. It was not an easy decision. Many of her colleagues were surprised. Some tried to talk her out of it, but she stood firm. She wasn't quitting. She was choosing a new path. One that allowed her to keep working, but with balance. One that gave her time to breathe, to live, and to love. With the money from the sale, Emma didn't buy a luxury car or a penthouse suite. Instead, she called Jack and asked to meet him. When she arrived at the farm, she found him in the same place as always, working with his hands, tending to the land covered in dust and sunlight. His eyes lit up when he saw her, "I've made a decision," she said, walking up to him. "I'm not going back to the life I had before." Jack looked at her, confused. "What do you mean?" Emma smiled softly. "I sold part of my company. I want to help you grow this farm, not just with money, but with my time, my ideas. I want to build something new. With you." Jack was silent for a long moment. The wind blew gently through the trees, and the air felt thick with emotion. Finally, he spoke. "Emma, are you sure? This life, it's not easy. It's long hours. It's not glamorous. It's not what you're used to." Emma took his hand. "I don't care about glamorous. I care about waking up next to someone I trust. I care about working with my hands, walking in the fields, laughing in the evenings without worrying about the next deal. I've been chasing the wrong things for too long. I don't want perfect. I want real." Jack's eyes softened and a quiet smile spread across his face. "Then let's do it together." And so, a new chapter began. Emma moved to the countryside, not overnight but slowly, step by step. She kept a small office in the city and visited when needed, but most of her days were now spent on the farm. At first it was hard adjusting. She wasn't used to early mornings and muddy boots, to lifting heavy baskets or learning how to plant crops. But Jack was patient, and Emma was willing to learn. She began to understand the rhythm of farm life, the seasons, the soil, the quiet satisfaction of watching something grow from the ground up. They turned the small farm into something greater. Emma used her skills to create a small brand for their produce, setting up an online store to sell fresh fruits, vegetables, and homemade. Because Jack handled the fields and the planting, while Emma took care of customers, packaging, and marketing. Together they built something beautiful, not just a farm, but a shared life filled with trust, laughter, and care. Word of their story began to spread through the town. People who had once whispered about the city woman who fell for the farmer now came by the farm to buy their products, to see the couple who had found something rare in a world so full of rush and noise. Even Emma's old friends slowly came around. When they visited her and saw how truly happy she was, many of them admitted they had never seen her this calm, this content. Her smile now came from the heart, not just from good lighting and camera flashes. Emma's parents, especially her mother, had taken longer to accept her new path. Her mother had always dreamed of Emma running the family business completely, living in the city, attending high society events. But even she could not deny the peace in her daughter's eyes. After visiting the farm and meeting Jack properly, she finally said, "You've chosen a different kind of success, and I can see that it suits you." One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Emma and Jack sat on the porch sipping tea, the warm glow of the day still touching their skin. The fields stretched out before them, golden and alive. Birds chirped softly in the distance, and the world felt still, full. Emma looked over at Jack. "Do you ever wonder how different things could have been if you hadn't been there that day?" Jack chuckled. "All the time. I wasn't even supposed to be near that road. I had taken the long way back home after delivering some eggs. Something told me to go that way." Emma smiled, her heart full. Maybe it was fate. Jack reached over and took her hand, gently squeezing it. Or maybe it was just one person helping another. But whatever it was, I'm glad it happened. In that quiet moment, they both knew something true. Love didn't have to be dramatic or flashy. It didn't need grand promises or perfect plans. Sometimes love arrived quietly, through acts of kindness, through patience, through shared moments under the open sky. Their journey hadn't been easy. It had taken strength, sacrifice, and courage. But through it all, Emma and Jack had learned one powerful truth: the best things in life often grow from the most unexpected seeds. You just have to have the heart to notice them and the courage to choose them. And so, under the stars of the peaceful countryside, the story of the poor farmer and the millionaire woman bloomed into something greater than either of them had imagined. A story of love not built on wealth or fame, but on the quiet strength of two hearts willing to meet in the middle and grow something beautiful together.